All right, welcome to the I Hope They Hear This podcast. We have with us a returning guest, Pastor Stephen.
Hello.
Thank you for coming.
Of course.
This is your second time, right?
Yes.
And last time you kind of made the announcement of your departure from your previous ministry.
Yep.
Yeah, and you're kind of well into your tenure at your new place. How's that going?
Yeah, it's been about 3 or 4 months, and oh man, it's been really good.
Yeah. Well, can I ask this?
Mm-hmm.
Which church do you prefer?
Oh my God, dude, that's so messed up. That's so messed up. I will say that, it's strange. It's like God will always place the right thing in front of you at the right time. Mm-hmm. So we're at Hun Vision now, and if I had found Hun Vision when I was 28, it probably wouldn't have worked out well, right? There's a time and a place for everything. And Promise Church, I learned so much there. It's where I cut my teeth, and learned so much about pastoral ministry. So now, kind of being in another place, just seeing God's faithfulness in that, and the things that He's taught me, but things that I have to both learn, that I have learned, but also things I must unlearn, and relearn. It's been really good. All of the initial fears that we had, God just silenced all of them with just his goodness, just kind of shutting up all of our doubts. And I think it is this reminder that obedience is always best, right? It's always best. And so it's been really good. We feel really blessed, really humble, really enjoying this community that we're able to serve. I feel like just from a pastor standpoint, man, I feel like God's been redeeming a lot of things in my life.
Wow.
My personal walk with the Lord, He's been redeeming my marriage, my role as a father, but also just in pastoral ministry, all the things that involve the pastorate. He's been allowing me to reclaim some joys that I didn't realize I had lost or had forgotten about. And so it's been a really great transition. Again, super grateful. Everyone's been so gracious and kind through all this. And so it's been really good.
Wow, what a really wise and politically safe answer. Have you considered political office? No, I'm kidding. No, honestly, that was really beautiful. And if you don't mind, can you expand a little bit on what it looks like when God redeems kind of your personal life? Were there things that you were struggling with before that God kind of worked on, or?
Yeah, when David sins against Bathsheba, he has that great psalm, restore unto me the joy of thy salvation. And I think it is that where it's there were areas of my relationship with God where there wasn't joy. There wasn't this enthusiasm. There wasn't this I think I found myself, without realizing it, I found myself in a place where I was not being struck by the gospel that I preach every week or speak to people about on a daily basis. And it created this type of callous hardness in my relationship with God where it's not like I was an apostate or something, but it's that intimacy, that fervency, that joy. And God's been really cracking that hardness. I think for a while I really bought into this mentality. Even though I know that it's wrong, I realized that I was buying into it. That effective leadership is hardening yourself and pushing forward through the blizzard. Create distance between you and people. Create distance in these gaps so that you can you are this leader that can weather every storm. And I think in doing that, I realized that I had allowed my heart to be hard towards not just people, but towards God. And so that joy wasn't there. And I think I allowed a lot more sins to enter into my life unchecked, unrepentant than I'd ever realized. And man, there was just this period, and it's still happening, where God is just knocking down walls.
Wow.
It's just this is not okay. My son, this is not okay. And just tearing these things down. And so in that, a lot of joy has been being reclaimed as I find myself kind of being just broken, just by God's grace. Yeah.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's amazing. A little bit related to that, something like the journey that I've been on, and then kind of the turning point that I saw this past week actually is in my walk with God, there was a big kind of pushback to the prosperity gospel, right? Because there I think a lot of churches are guilty of this, but I think for me, like the emphasis was always on the gift or always on the reward of all the goodness, right? So the last, I don't know, like couple of years, I think I was really just only focused on the cost, like the cost of following Jesus. You know, like Jesus says, you gotta love, you gotta hate your like mom, dad, brother, sister, son, daughters to follow Christ, right? And it's always, you read through some of the things Jesus says, and you kind of like lay it side by side. It's like, man, it's really harsh. Like it almost seems harsh, right? All the things, but I was like learning to like really take that to heart. Like, yeah, there is a cost to following Jesus, and those are all like really good things. But this past week, as I was reading through Matthew, it was when Jesus talks about like how the kingdom of heaven is like somebody who finds a treasure in the field, goes sells everything so that he can buy the field, right? And I was like, yeah, see, there's a cost of selling everything you have. But then the thing that clicked was he wanted to sell it.
So good.
Like, it wasn't like, oh, I gotta begrudgingly sell all that I have to go buy the field. It was he saw the value of what the field had, and he gladly sold everything he had and ran to the field. And that to me was like, that's right. Like I almost had forgotten about the reward, because like whenever there's a cost, like Jesus also tacks on with all the rewards, like all the feasting, like the parable of like the wedding guests. It's not just, oh, because you guys you guys weren't ready, like you guys are gonna be like not invited, and I'm gonna invite all these other people. And it's not just about the being cast out. There's a feast that happens. There's always a reward. And yeah, that passage like just clicked to me. Oh, God just took me through a journey about really understanding the cost, because I'd never really considered that before. And he kind of like took me back to basics, helped me build it up. And then like now that I'm really understanding the costs, he said, yes, but also look at the rewards. Like the cost isn't just pure sacrificial. You got to just grit through it and do it. You should be glad to pay these costs, because what you're going to get out of it is going to be amazing. And not to confuse people with like the prosperity gospel. I'm not saying that it's like transactional. Like you pay $1, God's going to give you $2. That's not what I'm talking about, right? There's a cost, and what you gain is Jesus. Yeah. And that's the greatest gift. That's the greatest reward you can gain. And so in that way that, you know, how you were kind of talking about, like how you were just kind of getting hardened by like leadership. And then like, I think I was kind of getting hardened by, yeah, let's just focus on the cost. And even the way that like I was discipling the guys that I disciple, it was always just on like, it was like very militaristic. Just don't ask questions. Just pay just do that. Yeah.
Grit your teeth, pay the cost, pick up your cross.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But for me, it was like just an eye-opening moment of, but we gladly pay the cost. Like God doesn't ask us to be joyful givers for no reason, right? Like there's a reason for that joy. So that's cool that God's like working in our lives in that kind of way.
That's crazy. Yeah. I mean, like Jesus is the prize. And the funny thing is, like my quiet times are in Matthew as well. And I came across the Pearl of Great Price this past week, and it fell upon this really interesting morning, an interesting week that I had last week, where I've been reading this book called Unwanted. It's so good. But it's a book about sexual brokenness, so it kind of covers the gambit of lust, porn addiction, sexual marital infidelity, just everything. And it kind of, he puts it all into one category that he calls it unwanted sexual behaviors. So the things that we don't want to do, but we keep doing. And he kind of does a deep dive into, essentially the premise of the book is, it's not enough to tell people don't lust. We should actually be telling people to think about their lust more, in the sense of like, why? Like, what is it? What exactly are you desiring? And then let's point to people on how Christ fully satisfies that thing that you think that pornography is going to offer you, that affair is going to offer you, that fantasy is going to offer you. It's a great book. So much so, our next retreat is going to be themed Unwanted. I think it's just so good. But anywho, I've been loving this book, and almost, I don't even think this was the intent. In some ways, this was the intention of the book. But one of the takeaways I was wrestling with was, without realizing it, like something clicked in me where I was like, you know what? A deep fear that I have is that I am unwanted.
Wow.
That like, if people really got to know me, they wouldn't want me. Like if they really knew me and like I was my unbridled self, like they wouldn't want me. They wouldn't want me to be their pastor. They wouldn't want me to be their husband, their friend, like whatever. So it's easier to put up walls. It's easier to put up barriers as a way to kind of protect yourself from this. Just like feeling, I'm afraid of being unwanted. And I was just having this morning where I was in the Word. I was right before I was just kind of praying, and I was like, and I really felt the Lord speak to me of just saying like, Stephen, like I want you, like I desire you. And I was like, okay, I don't, okay. And then I'm going to open up the Word now, and I'm in Matthew, and I get to the pearl of great price. And I just really felt the Lord saying to me like, you are the pearl of great price to me. Like I've sold everything for you.
Oh,
Like
wow.
I gave up everything for you. I desire you. And I'm just like weeping. I'm just like, oh my God. Like, okay, yes. Like now, and then from there has been like kind of this journey where I'm trying to track all of my sins to see where they're rooted in the place where I feel unwanted and how those sins can make me feel as though I am wanted. But only Jesus can fully give me that. And so, anywho, yeah, just what you said just reminded me of that.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing, and it's so appropriate. And this is Passion Week,
Yes.
and literally, Jesus paid it all, right? Like He paid, and for us, and so we can talk about like paying the ultimate price for Jesus or for God all day long, but like we'll never have to pay the price to the extent that Jesus paid for us. Yeah. Wow.
Good.
Oh, that is amazing. One thing that you mentioned, that book Unwanted. Yeah, I think I was actually talking to my pastor about this morning, actually, and talking about how normalized a lot of sin is, like especially for college students, right? Like one night stands, drugs, drinking, pornography, like all these things are so normalized, and it reminded me. So there's this movie called Tropic Thunder. Did you ever watch that?
Classic.
Yeah. And there's a factoid in there it's from the movie, so I don't know how true this is, but they're like walking and they talk about how how there was Blu-ray and HD DVD.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And they talk about how like, what do you think was the tipping point of why everyone went toward Blu-ray? Because for those of you who don't remember, right around the time where Blu-rays, like it was DVDs, and then the next thing people just assume was Blu-ray, but like HD DVD and Blu-ray kind of came around the same time. And in fact, it was like the PlayStation 3 was Blu-ray based and the Xbox was HD DVD based. But now you can't find the HD DVD, right? It's all Blu-ray. And they were asking like, what do you think that was? And they actually said it's because the porn industry backed Blu-ray. Like they have so much sway that they literally were the deciding factor of the next adoption, like the media adoption, right? And it just blew my mind about like, man, that the industry is so big because there's so many users or so many, I guess, consumers of that industry, right? So we know for a fact, like if that industry can sway that much, we know for a fact that it's a sin issue that many people are going through. But because it's so normalized, and we have a tendency to shy away from those kind of things within the church, that like it is a realization that I don't think a lot of people like get to. People just kind of is normalized and just like whatever. Like I'm okay being in the sin, but like I wonder if there was more. I guess I don't want to say aggressive, but more intentional dialogue around that within the church. If people will come to like similar conclusions. I remember having Edward on the podcast, and he got real vulnerable about that, and he talked about like kind of the issues, like the trauma that led him to some of those things, and it really is interesting. Like if you don't think about it, it's just another sin to you, and you're just like you're okay just kind of dwelling in that. But I think it is so valuable to be able to kind of dig deeper and kind of look to see what is that sin fulfilling in your heart that actually should be being fulfilled by Jesus.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that's a tidbit that I hope all the listeners kind of can take away. Yeah. Not to say that, that's the only sin that it applies to, because I think maybe all sins are in similar vein, right? All sin is related to some sort of unfulfilled desire that we've not looked towards Jesus for, right? Like one thing that I don't know if we, no, it was right before we hit record. We are talking about how I read through First Timothy 3 recently, and as an elder in the church, that first part of it is the qualifications of an elder, and I said that the of the qualifications, the one that stuck out to me the most this time was being a good head of the household, managing my household well. Because guys, I have two daughters, 5 and 3, and especially the second one. They're I always say, Kaylin, my second daughter, her D&D alignment is chaotic neutral. She's just an agent of chaos. Whether it's for good or for bad, she's just chaos. And so I'm always man, am I doing what I should be doing in raising up my kids? And sometimes I get harsher than I should with them, and I think about why do I do that? And I think kind of all ties back to, it's because I need to make sure my family's perfect so that I can portray this sense of perfection to the outside world. And that's I'm ultimately trying to get acceptance from humans rather than acceptance from Jesus. So this Passion Week, that's probably something we should be thinking about, the sins that Jesus died for. Yeah. So what else is that? Sorry, I spoke for a really long time.
Beautiful. That was beautiful because, at the end of the day, I think all of us can recognize that Jesus died for our badness, but he also died for our supposed goodness, right? The ways in which we try to cover up, self-righteousness, right? And so many of our sins, especially in the West where we are, we're still culturally Christian, right? Our sin, the sin of self-righteousness is so unchecked. But Jesus died for that. But we're always trying to cover ourselves up with something else, I totally agree. There is so much of the culture that is the normalization of sin is so prevalent and prominent because of the accessibility of sin is so prevalent and prominent. I was listening to John Piper and Kevin DeYoung were having a little talk on preaching, and Kevin DeYoung, he said something. He was talking about Calvinism, and while I'm not a 7-point Calvinist or something like that, but what he said I agree with. He's because they were asking him a question about passing on theology to the next generation, how important that is. And he kind of made this argument of one generation's loose Calvinism is the next generation's absence of Calvinism.
Interesting.
And I think the point that he's making there is if one generation has loose guidelines around something, the tendency for the next generation is to have no guidelines around that thing. And I think I can track with that when I think about the sins that are prominent in our culture. So if we go back to sexual sins, if one generation normalizes it, then the other generation is going to idolize it, right? And it just goes on and on and on, where there's no barriers around this stuff, and it's so normal that we can't just help but to fall into it. And so I think there needs to almost be this resurgence of, hey, let's make sure the church is being the church,
right,
and the people of God are being the people of God, unique and distinct from the world. Yes, we're called to love the world. Yes, we're called to minister and offer hope and truth and justice and grace. But the church needs to be distinct from the world. But I think that it's been too loosey-goosey on that front.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. Also, so I'm reading through the Machine Bible reading plan. So this is 4 books that I read a chapter of every day, and I'm also in Leviticus, And
Great.
yeah, the way, I mean, it's like the part where like everyone just kind of like skims over it.
Yeah. No one has it highlighted.
Yeah,
Like, it's
yeah,
just,
yeah. It's like all these like rules and regulations, right? But like what I'm realizing is, man, like the way that God made sure that His people, the Israelites, were separated,
Jeez, yeah.
it's huge. Like
insane.
there's so many different things. Like make sure, like down to like the types of animals you can eat. Like if they like chew the cud, I don't
Yeah.
even really know what that means. But then like hooves are split or not. Like there's so many things. Like you can do these things, but I want you to be like, but you cannot do these things because I want you to be separated, set apart as my people. And yeah, we have so much new freedom in the new covenant, but there is that value of remaining people who are set apart that I think as as the American church, I think we've lost. Yeah. It's almost like you can't distinguish who's a Christian or who's not.
For sure.
Yeah. I mean, that's sad.
Yeah.
So what do you think? Are there things that we can be doing better in your mind in terms of like maybe low hanging fruit for us to immediately have more impact in terms of being set apart?
I think that the church has kind of been pursuing relevancy for a long time. And how do we connect with the younger generation and yada, yada, yada. I think there's a lot of churches who are still wrestling with that. I think that some low-hanging fruit is to kind of push against that a little bit, right? Like stop pursuing relevancy. Right? Like, let's get back to some solid teaching. Like, I know we're at like 30-second clips, 10-second clips, TikTok theology era, but like, I think the local church should really push back against that. Like, if you're a teaching pastor or some type of teaching role, like, dude, double down. Like, double down on your doctrine, right? Double down on just gospel-centered biblical teaching. And yeah, it might be content heavy. Yes, some people might fall asleep, but reality is they're going to fall asleep anyways, right? Like whether you were giving a relevant talk or not, they were going to fall asleep. And so let's not sacrifice that, right? I think just on a baseline level, what are we teaching? Let's bring it back to some foundational stuff. Because, you know, I do have this fear that preaching 10, 20 years from now is going to be like 5-10 minutes. Like, I'm really concerned because our attention spans are like nothing.
Yeah.
But I think we should really push back against that. And let's give people something of substance rather than just trying to be relevant.
Yeah.
And if you lose some people because of it, lovingly, like, okay. That's fine. You probably had too many people anyways. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you had too many people.
Right.
But yeah, get back to the roots of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there was this movement, kind of the seeker-friendly movement of the church where I think it was commendable, like the desire behind it. It was, let's get rid of all obstacles for people who want to come into the church. But maybe there was too much focus on just getting people into the church that we've lost sight of what do we do with the people that are in the church. It's still like the focus I feel like is on getting people in, but then the people who are in, they need to be getting sanctified, they need to be getting equipped, they need to be being taught. But yeah, you kind of lose some of that when your focus is simply on relevancy and kind of being palatable for the masses.
Yes.
Yeah. Because there was I think it was this probably happened to a bunch of like Christian like famous people, but there was a phase I feel like in like the like 2010s to like even now where whenever the topic of homosexuality would come up, like these really big name people like Carl Lentz, like from Hillsong, like New York, like he would say stuff like, well, I'm not called to judge. Like, yeah, true. Yeah. But like, you also know what God says about that, you know? But there is this, well, I don't want to lose the people that might be dealing with same-sex attraction, like from coming into the church, which I think is a good intention.
Absolutely.
But are you sacrificing the message for that? Which, I think is unfortunate that people do that. Yeah.
I agree. And I think now is such a great time for Christian leaders not to think less, but to think more. Because we can't sacrifice the truth.
Yeah.
But just because we're afraid of offending people doesn't mean we can't say it. But I think, I don't even know if this is an in-between. I don't want to think about it like that. But we have to be able to present biblical truth in culturally relevant ways, right? But it's still biblical truth. You know, you can't sacrifice truth for the sake of relevancy. But, you know, there's nuance to the talk. Like, I think there's a way in which you could speak into those things without going to the extreme of alienating people.
Right.
And I think that's where the church has lost some of its sharpness. There's no bite. Like you were talking about earlier, there's no cost. Right? There's no cost to following this Jesus who was like half crucified for half of your sins. Like, you know what I mean? Like, what is this?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right when you said, like, without the extreme part of being too almost unforgiving.
Yes.
Like, I think about it as like Paul Washer. Great preacher.
Yeah.
Great
Fantastic.
preacher. But he is really, like, he cuts to the heart of the issue, and he is probably the only, like, fire and brimstone type of preacher that I know of. But I mean, there is, I think, wisdom in how you deliver the message. But I think the point is the message is the message. The message cannot be changed to, like, to appease the masses.
Yes.
Yeah. You know, and that kind of reminds me, last time we had dinner, we talked about gambling.
Yeah.
Right. And like, that was a interesting premise where you said, yeah, we should talk about, like, situational stuff, right? Like, pastor and you have much more experience than me. I'm a very new elder. So I'll probably lean on you more. But in situations where kind of, it's not black and white, like sin or not sin, like, what are the things that you would do? So that was an interesting conversation. Do you want to kind of rehash that?
Sure.
Yeah. So, like, somebody at your church is, like, having poker nights, right? And they're gambling actual money. Like, what is your opinion about that as a pastor?
I think that in areas that are gray, so it's not like Exodus 23, right? Where we don't have a clear teaching. I think you have to take biblical principle and apply it to your cultural context. And I think that's where you try to get a faithful answer.
Yeah.
And you could talk about that in terms of gambling, alcohol. I guess you can make an argument about tobacco usage, but I think that's a little bit more clear. But anywho, you got to take the biblical principle and apply it to your cultural context. Well, what's the biblical principle? Well, around money, the biblical principle is pretty clear, right? We're all called to be stewards. Everything belongs to God, right? Like, tithing 10% is just, like, symbolic at best. Like, everything belongs to the Lord, right? And we're called to, live out of that, parable of the talents, being generous givers, like you mentioned earlier. And so there's that. The cultural context, for me in doing ministry, I know a lot of churches and a lot of families that have just been utterly destroyed by gambling, right? And I know we're in a culture that accepts it, like DraftKings. I see commercials for that all the time, right? Every sporting event now, it comes with a gambling advertisement.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to be here saying, like, okay, gambling's clearly a sin, but it is unwise. And in a cultural context, I think that's where the concern is, where if we're ministering to people where this has been a plague in their family, or it could be a plague in their family, we need to be wise. And here I think there's a difference between whether I speak to a member or whether I speak to a leader. Member, I'm like, hey, you should really be cautious here, man.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not here to micromanage your money, right? But, really check your heart in this, right? Like, if you're gambling every sporting event, I think you have a problem. I think you have an idol, But for a leader, I think it's a different story. Just because you are held to a higher standard.
Yeah.
And you can lead people astray.
Yeah.
And Jesus says some pretty harsh things for people who lead others astray. And so I think I would rather err on the side of caution than everything's permissible, so why don't we do it?
Right.
At least in the Asian American context, like, we're such problematic people. You put one vice in our lives, it's like, it goes rampant sometimes.
Yeah. And actually, this is like really relevant for me because like 2 weeks ago, I was in Vegas. A buddy of mine, it was a bachelor party, and I I pulled out $300 from my ATM, and I said, you know what, I'm just gonna like play with the 200, because I was there for a weekend. I said, I'm just gonna spend 200, and that'll be like my entertainment price.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna I'm not gonna try to make money. Like if I make some money, great, but whatever. Like, so I did that, and then I was so confident that I wouldn't touch the remaining 100. But then like the morning when I was flying out, like my friends were like, oh, let's try doing this, and then I was like, okay, fine, and I kind of like I did it, and I realized, man, like there is a real slippery slope. Like literally everything here is designed to like engage your senses and make you want to do it more and more and more. And we would be naive to simply say like, oh, because gambling isn't explicitly forbidden in the Bible, that we should just say it's okay. Like I firsthand saw like there is real like temptation here. Like there is a real draw, and for people who, and I don't really have the best like self control either. So that's probably why I spent the remaining last $100, right? But like if I were in that environment more often, like I can potentially see myself falling into that, and
I would go bankrupt.
Right? Yeah. So I think there is, and culturally speaking, me growing up, at least in the Korean American church, like gambling was always kind of like, no, don't do it, don't do it. So that's kind of the culture I had. So that's why I always stayed away from it. But like what you were saying before, like if we have like looseness around it of just like, yeah, you can gamble in moderation, kind of do it, but like whatever kind of thing, then I can see if I had grown up in that kind of culture, me maybe being more into gambling,
Sure.
and being a degenerate, like, you know, some people out there like spending their rent money or their mortgage money. So yeah, there is real wisdom, I think, in like at least for elders to say like what you're portraying can be a statement on what you're telling people is permissible versus not permissible. And I think there is real it is, we really do have to be cautious about that.
Yeah, and I think, and to kind of add on to that, this can't be presented like, oh, I don't do that sin, but
right.
you do on the weekends. That's fine. I guess you don't love Jesus as much as I do. I don't think that's the case at all, right? Like to each his own, right? Like do the thing that you feel that God is commanding you to do. But just make sure that you've really wrestled with it before the Lord before making any action or decision. But I think even if you come out of the other side saying, okay, this is my conviction, I think it needs to come from, when it is communicated to others, it needs to come from that place of humility of like, this is my conviction, not because I'm better, but at least for me, it's because I'm actually worse. Like seriously, like I've been cutting media out of my life as well because my addictive personality is so powerful. I can't give anything a foothold. And so yeah, it's just I'm a mess. I'm a mess.
Yeah, no, 100%. Me too. That's why like I'm so glad that God shielded it from me.
Yes.
Because like seeing the little taste of it in Vegas, I'm like, man, like if I had this experience in college, my life would be drastically different. I would be, and like, I don't know how Instagram knows, but it keeps giving me like reels about like gambling strategies and stuff like that. And it's like everything is working against me to try to get me to fall into the sin.
100%.
And yeah, it's no judgment. Like all I'm like, like we just need to be really careful, and we really need to struggle with it and wrestle with it when the thing hasn't really taken a stronghold in your heart. Like when it's like when we think it's a permissible thing and it's like there and it's like a little gray area. I think that's like if you don't struggle with it then, it might be too late later down the line.
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. And anything else on gambling?
No, I think that's bad. Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to ask you about, because I actually had a lengthy discussion about this with other pastors, is not what's the opposite of monogamy?
Polygamy?
Polygamy. Yeah. what would you do if a polygamous couple came to your church?
Oh, that's pretty crazy.
Yeah, like so, like let's say there's a guy who has two wives, and like they all, each have kids, and they came to your church, and they're like, "Hey, we want to learn about what this is, and like we want to give our lives to Jesus." Like, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think for anything like that, and I think you could apply this to so many other things. Like, what if a professional gambler, like a poker player, came into the church? What if a sex worker came into the church? What if yada yada yada? Anybody where somehow a part of their life has become a primary identifier of their life. So anyone who's in a situation like that, I think you start with Jesus and work your way backwards, right? Like let's start with the gospel. Let's start with who Jesus is. Now, when it comes to someone who's in a polygamous marriage, in my opinion, that marriage might be valid in a state, but it's not valid before God. So as far as I'm concerned, like they're not really married. Like they might have some civil liberties because of whatever their marriage status is, but as far as I'm concerned, I would think that before God, that's not legitimate because that's not the way that God designed it. And fundamentally, marriage is before God before it is before any civil court, I should say. And so, I think that what I would encourage, after a strong and sharp and consistent presentation of the gospel, is that they would have to separate. They would have to separate, and we'd have to figure out the messiness of that, and that's really messy. And you're going to need to provide all types of counselors that are like way above my pay grade, but we're going to have to bring them in to help work through it, and then really redeem what marriage is for that family and what marriage is for those children. And so, I think that's the way I would try to do it. But that's just shooting off the hip here.
No, and that's kind of what I also said. But the pushback was like, so do we ask, so let's say it's a guy with two wives. Do we ask both wives to separate? Do we just like say the first marriage was valid, but the second marriage wasn't? And if like in the US, this probably won't be an issue, but like, let's say let's say you're doing missionary work in like Africa, right? Somebody who's a woman married to a man might be their lifeline, right?
Yes.
Like, and a separation might mean that they might go hungry or homeless and things like that. So like their pushback was, like, do we need to go that far? Because it, at least in that context, it does seem to negatively impact the women. Like, so how do we deal with that?
I think this kind of maybe, I'll elaborate on like, you have to bring in counselors and stuff. I think if I were to elaborate on that, that's the thing. Like whatever you have them do, you need to create the support system afterwards in order to help guide them through it. Like let's say you have someone in your congregation who's struggling with homosexual attraction. It's not enough to say, stop doing that. You need to be able to provide the resources to help navigate the complexities, right, of their sexual attraction. And I would argue the same here. Like you don't want single mothers. That's such a difficult place. And so the church needs to find a way emotionally, financially to kind of step in there and kind of really guide the complexity of the situation. Yeah. And so I would say that support system would have to be there. And then you just have to be like, you know what, we're going to have to figure this out probably till we die. Right? This is it. Like it's complicated, it's messy, but this is ministry sometimes. It's complicated and messy.
Yeah, and the other pushback I got was, monogamy is explicitly commanded for elders and deacons, but is it explicitly commanded for like just people? And I want to say yes, but I don't know that I can point to maybe like Adam and Eve, right? But then I don't know that I can point to like maybe a letter that Paul wrote saying everyone just be married to one person. Yeah.
I think Jesus affirms God's design for marriage in Matthew when he talks about divorce, right? A husband of one wife, right? I think he's affirming the Old Testament understanding that it was designed to just be one man and one woman. I think God's design is God's command. And the Bible's very consistent because when we see polygamy in the Old Testament, it never goes well. It is always destructive.
Right. And
so I think Jesus affirms God's intention in Matthew when he talks about divorce and he pushes back on the Pharisees.
Yeah. That's so good. We make such a mess of things when we sin.
100%.
And then it's like this, the heart of repentance to try to, even if you're making it even messier by trying to write it, like I think there is beauty in that. But yeah, I think you're right in the sense that like the church has to be really clear about the message that we're sending, and be the support system for people in those kind of situations.
And I think that's where you apply truth and grace. Because just the truth without grace is saying, stop doing that and you better figure it out. Grace, I think, is, hey, you should stop doing that. Let me come beside you and let's really work through this. Let's work out of your brokenness and to see how the gospel of grace is going to restore and redeem this. But I'm just going to be someone who walks alongside you for that. I think that's so critical and often missing in ministry. The messiness of, I will walk alongside you and we will navigate this. That's the hard work, I feel like.
Yeah. Wow, that's so good. There's there's a guy named Mike Winger. Do you know who that is?
Yeah.
Yeah, he actually did like 2 videos on it, because he did one like way back when, and then he came back and said, I've been thinking about this more, and I've actually changed my mind. And I think he lands on like where the conclusion that we're making. But I think like he even like had to really wrestle with like, what does it look like to ask somebody to, and I think actually the whole example of like being in missions in Africa, that example was from him. He was talking about that, how like culturally that's like so different from what would happen here. But yeah, I think ultimately we need the Bible to be the greatest authority, and we need to abide by the commandments and the design that God gives us. Yeah. Wow, that's so good. Wow. There's so much messiness there.
There is. But we need to live in the tension of the truth of the word and how to apply it to people living in the modern era. And I think we just need to be willing to sit in that tension for as long as we can, like probably till we die.
Yeah. Any other like interesting? Oh, actually, one more. How do you deal with couples that don't go to the same church? Like, or is there anything to deal with there in your mind?
I don't think there's anything to deal with until we start approaching marriage. I think you could probably even write out a list of pros and cons to going to different churches, when you're dating. But when you get closer and closer to marriage, especially that engagement period, you got to have some hard conversations there. Decisions must be made.
Right. So you're of the mind that a married couple should be going to the same church?
100%. 100%. In Ephesians, when Paul talks about this relationship between husbands and wives, he speaks about it in the context of community. That means that in many ways, marriage cannot exist isolated from community. It is all this idea of oneness, right? And from church to community to marriage to family systems. And so, married couples, absolutely. Unless there's like some extreme circumstance, right? Where, one spouse needs to be away for a period of time. But I don't even think that's very favorable. Like, you should avoid that at all costs. Like, your kids shouldn't just see you on the weekends, right? Like, they can't just have one parent. And so, they should absolutely be it. And maybe this is a side tangent, but I think paired with that, I think with that same principle in mind, more dating couples, and the church should do a better job of this, but more dating couples should open themselves up to the community and let the community be a part of their journey, from their struggles to their victories and just navigating these things.
100%. I think, the goal should be to have some sort of authority over your life. Actually, let me add this context. If we are truly under the kingdom of God, and we believe that that kingdom is here, like in the Lord's Prayer, that will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So if we believe that we are part of his kingdom, there needs to be some level of authority over us. In the grand scheme, yes, it's the Bible, right? God is the king, and he is the authority over us, but God also established the church. And there should be some level of authority that you grant the church, so that they can speak truth into your life, and they can correct, they can guide, they can teach. But a couple that either are hiding their relationships or they go to different churches, it's very difficult to give proper counsel into those relationships. And like, cause like, let's say that a girl that goes to my church is dating a guy that goes to your church. 100%, if there's an issue, 100% of the time it's going to be, oh, our person is right. And you're going to be, no, our person is right. Because we're getting two halves of the story and they're being presented as the full story, 100%. Right? So like it's not conducive to getting real good biblical counseling and direction in that situation. So yeah.
Yeah. And if I could just add on to that,
please.
Like, I totally agree. Totally agree. And I think another issue that I see there with going to separate churches is, the local church matters. Like, it just fundamentally matters. And I know that we live in a day and age where we can access anything and everything. You can access a church worshiping in DC while you're here. You could listen to some of the greatest preachers, that have ever lived just on a Sunday morning. But what you can't do is you can't submit your life to their leadership. And because of that, like, it doesn't matter how good someone else's preaching or teaching might be, like, they don't know you. They don't know what's going on. They're not praying for you. How could they? They don't know you. Yeah. And so I think there is this benefit of even members just, hey, really commit to your local church. I'm not saying don't ever listen to someone else that preaches or anything like that, but there's a benefit. And just, you know what? I'm going to submit. Unless that leader's doing something heretical, unbiblical, whatever, I'm going to submit. I'm going to submit. And I know that God's going to grow that somehow. Like even, Paul himself says that he's not a good speaker, right? He's like, there's a lot better speakers than I am, yada, yada, yada. And yet, like, he's the person for Timothy and for Titus. They come under him. And I think there's a lot of wisdom in that. There's a lot where God can really grow you in that. And if you're just willing to just commit and submit to the local church. And obviously the other side of that is the local church needs to be responsible with that authority, right? Like there can't be an abuse and yada, yada, yada. Like leaders, you need to follow people who are following Jesus at the end of the day. But I would love to see more of that as well, especially just in the Atlanta area of just, dude, let's really commit, guys. Let's commit.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's so great because the mindset of Christianity in America has like really just kind of been twisted up and shriveled down to like, where's the content that I can consume?
Yes.
So like we're confused. Like there's a fundamental misunderstanding of what the church is. People either think about it as like evangelism centers or just a place to get your like biblical feeding. And that's it. This idea of like local church authority has been completely dismantled. And probably because the churches haven't done a great job of stewarding that authority and that leadership. But I think the intent and the design is for a church to be receiving its authority from the Bible, from God. And then the authority that it exerts or exercises on its people should be modeled by the way that Jesus served, which is by washing his disciples' feet in a very servant-minded way, but in a biblical way, right? Like Jesus wasn't always just, come here, like, let me embrace you, and like, you're just, wounded lamb. No, it's, if you did something wrong, like flipping tables, like that's wrong, like rebuke. So like the church, I think, is naturally timid when it comes to rebuking and teaching and correcting in those matters. But I think that needs to be the function of the church. Like the authority isn't just there just for authority's sake. It's so that you can speak into these people's lives. Like at our church, when we do membership, we explicitly say, do you give authority to the elders to rebuke and teach when necessary? And like if they say no, then sorry, we can't accept you into membership. Like we just can't, like that can't be the community that we create, right? And it's not a power play. We're not saying that the elders are like super Christians or anything like that. It's just the elders have committed to trying to be as faithful to the Bible as possible and correct and rebuke in those biblical ways. And that's ultimately going to be more healthier for the church. And in losing a lot of that, I think we've become this more consumer minded. Like, yeah, like if you get rebuked and you don't agree with it, you can just go down the road and go to a different church.
100%.
You know, like, and so like without the people actually submitting to the local church and saying, yes, I will submit to your authority, so that when there's need, you can rebuke. You know, like unless that can happen, like I think the design of the church can't reach its full potential. And again, for the safeguard here is, if your leaders are doing things that are clearly unbiblical, then no, yeah, you got to fight against that. You got to leave that church. You got to speak up. But that requires you knowing the Bible. So you gotta,
Step one.
right, step one, read the Bible.
Yeah. No, I absolutely agree. And I think from the leader's perspective, you know, to our fellow leaders in our local churches, you know, before we rebuke, let's check our hearts, right? Like, if you're going to call someone out on pride, like, you better check your own pride. Like, the Holy Spirit needs to convict you, and you need to be broken, right, in all the areas, so that you don't rebuke with the spirit of self-righteousness or condemnation, but really wanting to see restore. Like, you know, the same goes for preaching and teaching, right? Like, you can't preach and teach unless that has been first preached and taught in your own heart, right? Like, there's no way you could do that with any measure of integrity. But on the other side of that, you know, I think for local church members, it's like, yes, your leaders are flawed, but God has appointed them. God is their judge. God must hold them accountable, right? But there is this call to submit to earthly leaders. Yeah. And I think the danger here too is that, like, so let's say, for example, like, there's a couple that's dating in your church, and like they come to you and you're like, hey, this isn't a good relationship. Like, this is really unhealthy. This is unwise. You're not in a good place. Here's just some things that I see that really concern me. And they're like, oh, like, David sucks as an elder. You know, this church sucks. Yeah, I should have signed that membership. And let's say they come to me and they're like, Pastor Stephen, like, this is all the great things about our relationship. Could you believe that a church leader said that we shouldn't date? And me just hearing the good things, am I going to say, well, oh yeah, you guys seem like a great couple to me.
Right.
I can't believe that. You know what I mean? And now all of a sudden you've just found someone who shares your opinion.
Right.
Totally discounted the authority of the person who was above you and really understands your story and what's going on. And I think that looseness is so prominent. And that's why we have the transfer of the saints here in Atlanta, that we just transfer to whose opinion fits our life stage and what we want to hear. Because we have the option and the luxury to do it. And if there's no local church, guess what? I'll just tune in on YouTube. Right? Like, it's no problem.
Right. Or I've seen this happen where they say, my understanding of God is so much better and more elevated than everyone around me that I don't need to go to the church, and I'm going to maintain this personal relationship with Jesus separate from the church altogether. Which is like, it's like the height of arrogance, first of all. But it's like, if you're so close to God, like, why aren't you doing the things that he said? Like, being a part of the community, like loving your brothers, like loving your like sisters, like, how do you do all of that without being part of the church community? You know? And it's funny you said about like kind of like just going to the teacher that agrees with you. Like, Paul called it. I forget which book he wrote it in, but he said there will be a time where people collect for themselves teachers of their passions. Yeah. And like, I'm like, man, Paul was spot on. We're doing that. Yeah. And one thing kind of related to the couples at different churches, the thing that our church kind of struggled with, and we still do struggle with, is because we are part of a Korean American church, there's essentially two sets of leaderships, right?
Yes.
On the KM side, Korean ministry, and EM. So what about couples where one person is more comfortable with Korean, so they go to the Korean side, and the other person is more, comfortable with English? So they're in the same church. But so like we like really had to be honest with ourselves and said, like, if there's a real like language barrier issue here, like, yeah, you can go to this. You can receive any sermon anywhere, but we still strongly encourage couples to at least attend, even if it's like you have to double up, like go to this service and then come to, like, we really encourage members to go to the same service together, because not only is the issue like church authority, but also we call all husbands to be heads of their household in the way that they lead spiritually, right? But if they're not receiving like the same messages and they're not like they're receiving from like two different sources, like how can you? It just doesn't seem like the most effective way to lead spiritually when there's like that kind of separation there. So like we don't say you're disqualified from membership because you're going to two different services, but we really strongly like say, I mean, we would if they're different churches altogether, but in the within the same church, like the different services, we let them know this is our preference, and like we hope that you can get there one day, but for now that's fine. But the reason why we think you should be in the same service is X, Y, and Z, and we kind of lead people that way. Yeah. But and that was something that we had many meetings to kind of discuss and really hash out to see what our stance on that was. Yeah.
That makes sense. That makes sense. And you know, again, it's like even in a situation like that. So let's say, for example, like you and I both had to preach on Galatians 5. There'd be two different sermons coming out of that.
Right.
But if me and a KM pastor had to preach on Galatians 5, it might be very different.
Right.
Like, you know what I mean? Just culturally. Not that one's more biblical or not. It's just culturally, we have to speak into the context. And so if you're getting two different things, you know, what do you do with that? And then you could probably make that argument for, you know, youth ministry and children. And then all of a sudden we're down this huge rabbit hole. But I think those are conversations worth having.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. We at our church, we have like family worship where the kids come and worship with us.
Yeah.
But I mean, we do after the praise portion, we do send them to their respective ministries. But like, it's kind of our way of like, let's try to model like how we worship and how we like praise the Lord together as a church. Because there are, unfortunately, especially I think the white church, like they do a better job of this, but like the Korean American church, there are some people who never see their parents in worship.
Yeah.
Like it's, you go to youth group and then once you graduate, you're in a separate EM service. So like you never really get to see like how your parents are worshiping God. And that is kind of sad. Yeah.
100%. And I remember when I was a youth pastor, that's one thing that I would always struggle with because I would have this youth ministry. I had enough know-how to get it to a certain point, but then I would get stuck. And that's, okay, there's no more guidance. So I would have to go outside. Like I'd go to different youth conferences or whatever. And one thing that they would always talk about is the importance of family. And I'm like, oh, it was like so inspired. And I'd come back and I realized I can't apply any of this. Like I literally, like I can't apply this. And I was like, this is a huge barrier. This is a huge barrier because if we agree that your spiritual life is the most important thing, then that means that children are withholding the most important thing from their parents, and their parents are withholding that from their children, and that's a problem. Yeah. Right? It's such a big problem.
Yeah. It's like a weird situation that happened in the Korean American context because like the immigrant, I guess this is just all immigrant families, right? The immigrant family, I think, has this desire to give the best education to their children, and they know that they're not equipped to give that education, so they send it to school or like private tutoring. Like they like outsource that, right? And I think unfortunately that mindset gets kind of layered on top of spirituality too. Like I'm for whatever reason I'm not equipped. The language barrier, cultural barrier, maybe your own faith isn't that. It is really immature. Like for whatever reason, I think a lot of the immigrant parents kind of resign themselves to like, we can't do that part of it, so we're gonna outsource it. So a lot of times I see like youth group teachers becoming like the sole source of spiritual guidance and leadership for children when they should be receiving actually the majority of that from their parents, you know.
And I say this lovingly, but a lot of those youth teachers, it's the blind leading the blind. Like, you know what I mean? It's a 21-year-old leading a 17-year-old. Like, come on now. You know, it's the blind leading the blind. It's such a problem.
Yeah.
And I think a part of it does explain why there's this huge exodus, right, in the Korean American church from high school to college. But yeah, it's the blind leading the blind.
Yeah. I think the stats on that is like, isn't it like 70% leave?
It's like 90.
Right? Okay.
Yeah.
And
It's
then
insane.
of, of the 90 that leave, there's only like 10 or 20 that eventually come back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, Pew Research, they just came out with their Religious Landscape in America study. And right now, within the church in America, so they're lumping together Roman Catholics, Protestants, and Eastern Orthodox. Right now, for every 100 people that enter into the church, 500 to 600 leave.
Wow.
It's insane.
Wow.
Now, the Protestant church is actually doing a little bit better, but its better is actually atrocious. Right now in the Protestant church, for every 100 people that come in, we lose 180.
Wow.
So it's a net loss.
Yeah.
The Roman Catholic Church actually is suffering more. Right now, for every 100 that enter the Roman Catholic Church, 800 leave. It's insane.
Yeah.
But one of the commentators on this research made this interesting point, and I think I'm trying to find a way. I'm seeing the way it connects into our context, but they were arguing with the Roman Catholic Church. People are like, well, if that number is true, how come all these like churches aren't shutting down? And they said one of the things that's buffering these numbers is immigration. Since immigrants are coming in, it's kind of like everything's kind of fuzzy right now. Right. These numbers are true, but because there's immigrants coming in, you're able to bolster it a little bit. But when immigration stops, you should be concerned. And I feel the exact same way about the Korean Immigrant Church. Like, our numbers are horrible, but immigration buffers our numbers. What happens when immigration stops? I think it dissolves. Like, I think we really look like we're going to face extinction if we don't figure something out here.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
Yeah. It's so sad to see how deprioritized the local church has become.
It's a joke.
Yeah, and it's sad to see a lot of the people I grew up with in youth group. They've either left the Korean church or they're attending like a mega church. Which I'm not knocking on that. Yeah, but it's just there. I do feel like the local church has like just so much to offer, and there's just so much that God can do there as well, that it's just a shame that it's being dwindled down that way. Yeah, so are there like kind of issues or things that you've had to struggle with in terms of like cultural stuff at church?
Yes, my whole church life, I guess. I'll kind of throw out some broad blankets just in like ministry in total, and then maybe hone in on a couple of specifics. I think that one thing that's really a cultural thing that's really tough in ministry, and we've kind of talked about this, but I just want to get a little bit more specific with it, is the desire to keep people. The desire to say yes and to meet everyone's needs. I think in general, Asian Americans, we have a hard time saying no to things, so we say yes to everything. But when you say yes to everything, you end up doing nothing. And sometimes you say yes to everything because you don't want to disappoint people. You don't want people to be upset. You don't want people to leave. I think it's absolutely destroying our churches. Yeah. Absolutely destroying our churches. We are trying to do too much. And when you try to do too much, I don't believe that we're building the body of Christ. Yeah. We're just demanding a lot out of a few people and asking everyone else to attend. And what you have there is a theological thinness. I think you have an ecclesiological thinness. Like, you just have a lot of thinness. There's no substance. Because you're just offering people program upon program upon program upon program, but there's no substance. Like, you're not, are they really growing in Christ likeness? Like, are you seeing dads love their wives and their children more? Right? Like, are you seeing couples serve one another more? Are you seeing more joy? Are you seeing more baptisms? Are you seeing more conversions? That's the stuff of the kingdom, right? Yeah. But yeah, this culture of just like, let's just, whatever people need, let's just find a way to do that.
One layer on top of that. So one of the responsibilities I have is finance in our church. So because I'm at the end of the year, I have to give the giving statement to everybody. I just know exactly how much everyone's giving.
Yes.
And so when there's someone who's giving a substantial amount, but they're like maybe like they don't agree with something, or there's like an issue there, the temptation is real to make things easier for them, because from a budgetary standpoint, like losing them will definitely hurt.
Yes.
And like we've had that situation, and like thankfully, like I wasn't the one making the decision, right? Like my pastor was wise enough to say, no, like what's right is right, what's biblical is biblical. Like we don't need to worry about like the hit to the budget.
Yeah.
But that was the first time in my life, like where I was like, oh, like this is why, like in the Korean church, like when we've seen like the rich people become elders and stuff like that.
This is why.
This is why.
It's good. That's so good. Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, like the temptation is real. Yeah. And I can see like when you believe you're in this survival mode that you just have to like do it, I can see why you would fall for this temptation. But there is a lack of trust and reliance on God in that moment. And like that's something I needed to repent.
That's so good.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's that. Go ahead.
No, I mean, I was just gonna say kudos to you.
Oh,
right,
no.
because in doing that, no, like seriously, because I think those are the things where God presents the next generation opportunities to course correct, right? To build off what the old is laid, but to really course correct, right? And I think that's it right there, right? That's an opportunity to course correct. Like, oh my God, I feel the temptation. I don't know what to do with this. It's a unique situation.
Yeah. And it's like when you're like looking at the numbers and you're like, my goodness, this person is giving 30% of our entire giving in the last year. We're like, first of all, how is that possible?
Yeah. What is everyone else doing?
I know.
What are you doing? Yeah.
And
so many questions.
right. Like, and like, so like, and then you start like justifying like, well, if this person is giving this much, they must be really faithful. Like, and they like you're like building a case in your head 100%. As to why you can allow certain things to go unaddressed and things like that. But yeah, the Holy Spirit doesn't remain silent.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. Yeah. I think another one that I see frequently is this idea that community is enough. Community is enough. We need people in the same life stage. We need places where we need to decompress. My wife and I were talking about this the other night. We need places to decompress. I agree that community matters. It is so important. We cannot live without community. I agree that it's important that you have spaces to decompress. Like husbands, you need to find someone to talk to about your wife and your kids, right? That's just safe. And you can really vent. Wives, obviously the same thing. Children, same thing. We need places to decompress. But I think that we've made an idol out of community and we've made false worship out of decompression, saying that's enough. And it's not. If I could use an example from like lower back pain, like if you have lower back pain, most people try to deal with it just by stretching it out, which is important. You have to decompress your spine. But after decompressing, you must strengthen your spine, right? So that you're really fixing the problem, not just putting a Band-Aid on it. I feel the same way about community and decompressing. Community is important. You need a place where you can decompress and complain about your life. But you need a place where you can grow in Christ, right? Like, are you worshiping the Lord? Are you growing in your knowledge and intimacy of the Lord, right? Are you growing in Christ likeness to your family, to your coworkers, to your peers? That matters. And I feel like we've substituted that completely and said, just come for the community.
Right.
But you're not growing.
Yeah.
So what are you doing?
Right.
You're not the church then. Like, we're not the church when we do that.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, one funny thing, at our church, we have small groups that are just for members. And when we first pitched that, there was so much backlash.
Yeah.
Like, what about new people? Like, how are they going to get plugged in? Like, all these things, right? And we said, well, like, the purpose of this community is to really become the church. And it's hard to do that when you have people cycling in and out. Like, it's hard to grow the trust and like start letting down your guard to like really like be able to confess your sins to one another, or like ask for really vulnerable like prayer requests and like these things, right? Like it's easy for me to like be really open with my wife, but then like a new person at a church, there's obviously many layers of barriers
100%.
That are there. So that was kind of the like the spirit of why we set it up that way. But the backlash was really informative to me of like these like people like value community a lot, like even more so than like the church, even more because everything like literally that's the only part of our church that's just members only. And we also allow like visitors. Like we're not saying that you're barred from going to any like
Sure.
yeah. So like we like people are allowed to visit small groups and things like that, but like we have Bible studies that's open for everyone. We have discipleship programs that's open for everyone. Like everything else, literally everything else is open. But like the backlash was like, oh, like people, like, there are a lot of people that come to church just for community.
Yes.
And that for them, the community, for some of them, community is more important than like the teachings, like the discipleships, like all these other things that are there as well. So like I think there is a lot more buy-in now. People understand why we did it the way we did it. But yeah, especially the first time we said it, people, I mean, there are some people like newer people who still come up and say, hey, like, why do we do it this way? Can we like make some changes? And we're always open to hearing new ideas and things like that. But like, yeah, like to your point, yeah, this idolizing of community above like every other aspect of church,
Yes.
it is normalized for sure. Yeah.
Like, I had a couple conversations with a few people over the past couple of weeks because they're in different churches around the Metro Atlanta area, and they're kind of debating whether they should stay or not. And one of the hinges for a lot of them is, well, there's just people here that I love, and I really respect that answer.
Yeah.
But just to be clear, like, you're staying there and your primary reason is that there's 5 people that you love. We need better reasons, right? I'm not saying you should leave, but like, I don't know, are you worshiping the Lord? Like, you know what I mean? Like, like, I think that is also very telling of like, that's my priority. I will stay at a place because of the few people that I consider to be my community. And my argument is, if you really like them, you'll probably see them after you leave that church, right? Like, you should have a better reason for staying. Like, oh, I committed to being a member, and I really want to see the body of Christ grown in this local church, right? Just something of substance, not just community. Yeah. Because community can't save you.
Yeah. Oh yeah, right? For sure. Yeah. And I would even say community doesn't necessarily sanctify you either.
Yes. Yeah. 100%.
It can for sure.
Yes.
Yes. But you can have community, you can have the best community, and the whole community could be sinning the same sin, like committing the same sin. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I would even say, like, in that situation, people like thinking about leaving, like, what's the reason for leaving?
Yes.
Like, I don't have anyone my age range here, or like things like that. And it's just like, yeah, but you understand, like, this isn't a social club that you're going to. Like, you're going to worship God. Like, is there something wrong with like your ability to worship God in this place? Like, those are conversations that I actually wish I had more boldness in being able to say, because I actually am pretty lax when people tell me they're like church hopping, and I personally am against church hopping. Yeah, like, in the sense that like you make a list of churches and you say, well, I'm gonna visit each one time, and then I'm gonna kind of see what's the best for me. Like, like I don't. It's not a sin. I don't want to say that there's nothing unbiblical about that, but there is something about like, just like the humility of being able to submit to a church means that you're accepting its flaws as well, and it's not necessarily because like as a consumer it checks off all your marks. Yes. So that's something I struggle with, because it's like if someone says like, if this church has a really good children's program, I'm like, yeah, I totally understand the heart of a parent who wants their children to like grow up with good like spiritual education and all that, right? But then it's like, is that it? Like, is there anything else that you're looking for in a church, or is that literally it for you? Like, so it is something I'm like actively still like kind of like thinking through, meditating
Yes.
on, and struggling with. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like I don't want to be harsh in that because I get it.
Yeah.
But it's like you're not shopping around for school
Right.
districts, right? You know what I
Right.
mean? And it's
Yeah.
like, oh, I want a place where my children can grow. It's called your family.
Right.
And the church is supposed to be a good supplement, and you should, as a parent, if you care about that, you better be right alongside that children's pastor. You better be at every PTA meeting, everything, just supporting, praying for them, walking, encouraging them, right? Like helping them be accountable. Like you better be doing all the things then,
Yeah.
instead of dropping off your kid and coming back to pick them up an hour and a half from now.
Right.
And again, like, if you say that's what you care about the most, then I think you have to put your heart in that too. And again, like no judgment, but I think millennial parents, we could use a little kick in the butt when it comes to the spiritual oversight of our families.
Yeah. When they say we want a good children's program, a lot of times what they actually mean is I just want a good babysitter
100%.
that takes good pictures that I can post on social media.
Exactly, with my kid holding a Bible verse like Jeremiah 1, like
Right.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. But but really being able to invest in that, like, it does matter. It does matter, and I think starting in the home fundamentally matters.
Yeah. That's one thing that I discuss with my pastor a lot. Is the thing we're seeing is in our church there's the youth ministry, and all the teachers of that ministry are people who are members of our EM. So they're not parents. So they're all like kind of quote unquote strangers.
Yeah.
And we're like, man, like when we think about like the father being the spiritual head of his family, like shouldn't there be way more like mothers and fathers of these children who are teaching in these ministries? And like my default response to that when I first heard that statement was, well, it's because there's a language barrier. Is kind of what I said.
Yes.
At
Yeah.
first. But then I'm like observing now, and I'm slowly realizing that's not really the case anymore. There are some still immigrant parents where there's an actual language barrier, but there are a lot of parents that are completely bilingual, totally adequate in the language.
Yes.
They could do it if they wanted to, but there's some barrier there for whatever reason where it's almost like it's not my job to teach my kids. And like, where did you get that? And like, well, look at the church. Like, I can just drop them off at this ministry and they can do a better job.
Exactly.
But yeah, the pushback, I think, for all parents out there who that's all they do to help their children's spiritual growth is tell me where in the Bible it says that. And then we'll show you all the verses where it says you should be the one pouring into your children's lives.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I remember I was a youth pastor, and this is before like I really started to understand just how important ministry in the family was, and how family is the starting place for all this stuff. I don't know if they taught me that in seminary, to be honest with you. I don't even know what I did there. But anyway, I was a youth pastor, and I was like, yeah, it's all about the youth program, and it's all about, I love equipping my youth teachers. I love equipping people to just like do ministry. So it's all about that. And I had this one girl, she was kind of going through a struggle, and so I was kind of helping her leader kind of, hey, this is some things you could do to walk through. And I remember the very next week, her mom was like, hey, could we talk real quick after service? I was like, yeah, of course. We sat down and talked, and she's like, hey, my daughter's been going through this, and the leader reached out to say, let's grab coffee. And she's like, I really appreciate that, but this is something that just in our home, like we want to navigate this. Like this is our responsibility, because she's having these doubts, she's having these struggles. And I really appreciate the teacher saying, I want to hang out with you, but this is something that her father and I are going to just try to work through with her. And I remember when I first heard it, I was actually kind of offended, because I was like, you don't think we can do a good job? Like, what do you mean?
Yeah.
Like that 20-year-old loves your 16-year-old daughter. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I was like, that's kind of arrogant. And that was like my youthful foolishness, right? Thinking that, yeah, we are the ones who do that, without realizing that, no, she was saying something very wise, something very biblical.
Wow.
Like, this is my child, and I am responsible for their spiritual well-being. Thank you for your help. Thank you. If you can do anything, please pray for her. But we're here, and we're going to try to navigate this. And I was like, man, man.
That is amazing.
Yeah. It wasn't until afterwards I was like, man, if my PTA was filled with that, it'd be incredible. You know? But like, you know, back then I think the youth group, there was like 120 kids in the PTA meeting. There was 10 parents there. I was like, this is useless. You know what I mean? Like, where are the 200 people that are,
Yeah. Man, that's ministry, I think, is really unique. Well, I guess every generation is going to be unique, but like the thing that's kind of the defining theme for us in our generation, I think, is course correction. It's the ship has been sailing in a direction for a very long time that, although well intentioned at first, has, I think, veered us off course quite a bit. And I'm so glad for people like you in this area that like are recognizing it and saying, well, these are things that we've done in this way for however many years, but like when I look at the Bible, I'm not sure that that's the right way to do it. So like, let's try to start course correcting. And I think that's a beautiful thing. I don't think we're not saying the previous generation was terrible. Like, we're not saying any of that. I think this is just the natural way that God is molding and shaping his church and his kingdom. And like, we just have to be sensitive to the Holy Spirit moving and just submit ourselves to him. And I think, there's a lot of challenges ahead of us.
For sure.
Yeah. And in this area, but I'm so glad, I'm so hopeful. I see so many people, other pastors that like I talk to regularly, who have this deep yearning to be as godly as they can be, to be as obedient, and that's the best we can do. Yeah.
I agree. I agree.
Yeah. Well, is anything else? We're at an hour 20.
Oh, cool.
But I'm not gonna artificially cut our time. Any other things that kind of you've had to fight culturally in the church?
I mean, there's so many things.
Let's do one more.
Okay.
One big one.
Culture in the church. Drinking culture.
That's a good one.
That's a big one.
Yeah.
Yeah, drinking culture.
Oh.
Yeah, I think that's a battle.
Uh-huh.
And I've kind of gone back and forth in different parts of my walk with the Lord and kind of wrestling with it.
Uh-huh.
But I think I'm at a place now where I'm pretty settled with my theology around it. You ever ask, dude, sometimes, I don't want to side tangent here, but like sometimes I just like sit there and I think about everything I believe and then I just play devil's advocate and I just counter it.
Yeah.
These days it's been about baptism. I've been going down an infant baptism rabbit hole for like months now. But anyhow, that's a conversation for another day.
Yeah.
But alcohol is something that I've gone back and forth on a lot.
Yeah.
But I think drinking culture is a real thing in our churches.
Yeah.
And something that probably needs to get checked.
Yeah.
One way or another.
Yeah. So what is your take on that?
So there was a time where I had no problems with drinking. You know, even enjoy it. Like I loved whiskey, I loved beer, and I had friends who would just crack open a beer and talk theology. Right, let's talk about the Bible. And it was kind of everything's permissible, right? Everything's permissible. It's not, there's not drunkenness happening. There's all this other stuff. And so I think I was able to kind of wrestle through it like that. But there would be periods of time where I would abstain from alcohol. Because I was really convicted by something John Piper said when asked about alcohol. And he said something to the effect of, he chooses to abstain because there are so many times where he's ministering to someone who's struggling with alcoholism, or he's ministering to someone who is their family's plagued by it. And he's like, how could I? Like, as their pastor, like, drink when I know that this is plaguing them. Like, just a very shepherd heart, right?
Yeah.
And I remember hearing that, like, ooh, that's really profound. And so there'd be times where if I was working with a youth student where alcoholism was a huge problem, whether that's their dad or their mom or whatever, I would abstain, like, just in solidarity. And I've kind of gone back and forth on that. But now I think I'm in the position. I was actually just talking to a pastor friend about this morning because he ended up having a very similar conviction that there's a difference here between leaders and members, right? Members, submit to your local church, right? And really follow God's conviction on this.
Yeah.
You can go either way and make a biblical argument, I think. But for leaders, I think for me personally, where I am as a leader is it's better to abstain. Because alcohol is a stumbling block. I know that the other argument is, no, you should use it to show that it doesn't have to have a hold, right? Like it can be brought in, and wine is joy, you know? I respect that. I really do, you know? You're not going to hear a peep out of me with that line of argumentation. But just for me personally, I feel like the Lord is asking me this. First, denominationally, I'm ECA, so I can't drink anyways. But it's something that I'm choosing not to partake in anymore in my life. Because I think it is a stumbling block, and I think it is a slippery slope, and there's no real health benefits. I can't really think of a spiritual benefit. And to all of my lovely brothers and sisters who will give the argument of, well, there's fellowship that happens when we drink. I'll take every other argument except that one. Because if we want to use the fellowship argument, then what I invite people to do is bring me your stories where drinking has saved someone's soul. And I will bring you my stories of how it's destroyed someone's life. And let's see who wins. Like, let's see which fellowship argument works better. I think it's a really poor argument. All the other stuff I can agree with biblically, but the fellowship argument I don't care for at all. But I think that's kind of where I'm landing. And I think that we should be robust and cautious with our teaching about it in the church. We need to talk about it more.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. That's good. Because the common arguments is like Jesus drank wine. Paul actually tells Timothy to drink a little bit of wine. Yeah,
because he's like not feeling well.
Right. So there's all these things about how like drinking is clearly permissible in the Bible. But I do think, the whole like fellowship argument is, I also hate that. I hate it when people need something to fellowship over and they completely overlook Jesus. Yes. Like guys, like just let Jesus be the thing that you fellowship over. Like, why do you need a supplement to Jesus, you know? So I'm totally there with you. Yeah. But like I haven't really thought about that much, like in terms of drinking. I almost feel like it was more of an issue when I was part of like youth ministry. Like, true. And it's clearly an issue because if you're breaking the law, that's a completely different story.
100%.
Right? But in terms of like adults, like what exactly is happening? There is a lot of gray area, and then like me personally, I don't really know many people who struggle with alcoholism. Or like even like overindulging in alcohol. So like it's never been an issue for me. But the things you're talking about totally make sense. Like if you are ministering to somebody whose family life is being torn apart because of alcohol, then how can you just be like popping a beer? Like, tell me more about that. You know?
Exactly. And I think also if you're in a place in your life where you're going to grab a drink every single night, like that's very telling to me. Like something's not right with your relationship with the Lord, your emotional life, your mental life, your spiritual life. Like something's not right. Because if it's every single night, then I think you're at a point where it might very well be an idol in your life.
For sure.
Right? If I ask you to throw it away, could you throw it away? If I ask you not to do it one night or abstain for a week, could you do it? Or have you developed some type of dependence on it? And I think at that point it is a concern.
Yeah. And I think this is why it's so important to be part of a local church where someone can speak that into your life. Because this isn't a clear yes or no issue that you can just glean from personally reading the Bible. Like, because I think you can convince yourself, if you're deep enough into the sin, you can convince yourself like, oh, because of this one particular line in the Bible, like I'm gonna justify my drinking, and I'm not in sin because of this. Like there is danger in, obviously cherry picking from the Bible. I mean, there is tons of truth, and I mean, the Bible is truth, right? But if you're deep in sin, like the chances of you misinterpreting or just like mishandling scripture, I think is too high. And so you need people in the local church that can, with sober eyes and sober minds, like really help you kind of navigate through that to come to a godly decision rather than just oh, this particular like esoteric passage here like talks about this.
Exactly.
And then you know, because like some people like you can like some people like refer to like the passage in Judges with Jephthah, where he makes a promise like, if you help me with this battle, I'll sacrifice the first thing that comes to my house, that comes out of my house when I get there, and it's his daughter.
Yes.
And he ends up like sacrificing her. Like if somebody read that, then they can just say, oh, God condones child sacrifice.
100%.
But you're ignoring everything in like Deuteronomy, like God like hates that stuff,
Yes.
right? So the Bible, of course, you should read. Like I'm not saying that you reading the Bible is not enough. Like no, like read the Bible, like be steeped in it, like yearn to and strive to be of the same mind as Christ. But God also established the local church for you to help you navigate through those things and to help you see the blind spots that you might not be completely aware of. So I really appreciate like everything that we talked about last hour, you know, like where there are people really thinking about it, really praying about it, really struggling with it to help people in those particular situations where it might be a little bit in the gray to help them be as wise as they can be.
For sure.
Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being on.
Thank you.
I really want to talk about infant baptism next time.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
Dude, I'm so deep in the rabbit hole. I'm totally happy to talk about it.
Yeah. And even like all forms of baptism.
Yeah.
I have some strong opinions about that as well. So let's just talk. We'll hash that out next time.
Dude, a baptism episode. Love it.
Yeah, let's do it. Well, thank you guys for listening. And I really hope you guys commit to your local church. I think if anything you take away from this episode, my prayer is that people take that away.
Amen.
Yeah.
Amen.
Well, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you guys next time.